Hello, this is William from Visual Components. In this video, I'm going to show you how to simulate a palletizing operation using the Works library. A palletizing operation is where you pick a part and place it on a pallet. In this case, we're going to be using a robot to pick and place those parts onto a pallet. So to get started, make sure you clear the 3D world of all components. You can press the Ctrl plus N key or click the File tab to go backstage and then use the Clear All command. Now we want to use the Works library, so I'll go to the eCatalog panel, and under Models by Type, I'll click this Smart collection called Works, and this collects all the components in the Works library for me. So you can see them listed here. And anytime you're doing something with the Works library, you need a Works task controller there. So I'm going to add this item here. It's version 3. And the location of the Works task controller doesn't matter. You just need it in your layout. I'll now add the process components I need for creating the parts that I want to then place onto a pallet. So I'm going to use a Works process component, in this case version 3. I'll drag it into the 3D world. And I want this process component to create a car tire, so I need to add that component to the 3D world and then reference it by name and then add a task for creating it. So I'm going to go to the eCatalog panel, and under Models by Type, I'll click Products and Containers, and I need to find a tire, so I'll just type in tire, and it found nothing, so I probably need to use British spelling, so T-Y-R-E, and there we go. Yep, it's this item here, so I'll drag it into the 3D world. And to create this component, its location doesn't matter, so I usually put them next to the task controller. I now need to get this car tire's name, so I'll just copy its name property here. I'll then select the Works process component, and I now need to create a task for creating the car tire. So in the Component Properties panel, I'll set the task property to the task I want to create, which is called Create. And I can now list the component names I want to create or make during a simulation. In this case, it's the car tire, so I'll just I'll paste in that name of car tire. And I could assign it a new product ID value, but by default it will be the component's name. So I'll just click Create Task, and if I run the simulation, there's the car tire. So let's reset. Now after I create the car tire, I want to transport it out and feed it along a conveyor line. So I'm going to add and connect a conveyor over here, and then eventually I want to stop the car tire over here, so I'll add another process component down the line. I'll go to my eCatalog panel, and under Models by Type, I'll expand Conveyors, click Visual Components. I'll then add a simple conveyor, so I'll drag this item into the 3D world, use the PMP command to plug the conveyor into the Works process component, and I'll now select this Works process component, and after it creates the car tire, I want to add a transport out task to send out that car tire down this conveyor. So in the Component Properties panel, I'll set the task to be transport out, and we could define what products we want to transport out by their IDs, but in this case I'll just keep the all checkbox selected, so everything in this Works process component will be transported out. So I'll create the task. If I run the simulation, notice the car tires are now fed or move along the attached conveyor. So we want to stop the car tires once they reach the end here, so I'm going to add another process component to the end. I'll reset the simulation, go back to the Works library. I'll then add another Works process component, so I'll find it here and add it to the 3D world, and then use the PMP command to plug it into the end of this conveyor here. Now I want this process component to look more like a conveyor, so I'll go to the Component Properties panel, I'll click the Geometry tab, and then for the Show Conveyor, I'll select its checkbox here, and I'll clear the Show checkbox, so now the Works process component looks more like a conveyor. I'll now add a task for transporting in a car tire, so it stops. I'll click the Default tab here in the Component Properties panel, and for task, I'll set that to be transport in, and we could define a single product we want to transport in, or we could just transport in anything, so I will keep this checkbox selected. I'll create the task, and when I run the simulation, I'll speed it up just a bit. We expect the car tire to stop when it reaches the sensor point here of the Works process component, and it does. Now these components, these Works process components, are executing their process or their task multiple times, so that's why more car tires are being created and fed into this process component at the end of the conveyor line. So let's reset the simulation and now set up to where we want the robot to pick and place those car tires. So we're going to control the robot using the Works library, so we need to add a robot controller. I'll go to the eCatalog panel, and we're already working with that Smart collection for the Works library, so this is the component you need. It's called Works Robot Controller, and instead of using version 3, I'll use version 4, so I'll drag that into the 3D world and position it to the side of that endpoint of the conveyor line. And let's now add and connect a robot to this controller. So in the eCatalog panel, I will collapse conveyors under Models by Type, then expand robots, scroll down, click Visual Components, and add a generic articulated robot to the 3D world. So I'll drag that item in, and then use the PnP command to connect the robot to the robot controller. Let's now add a tool to the end of the robot's arm here. So in the eCatalog panel, I will collapse the Robot Smart Collection, expand Tools, click Visual Components, and let's add a simple gripper. So I'll scroll down, and let's use this item here. So I'll drag it into the 3D world, and use the PnP command to plug the tool into the end of the robot's arm. And to verify the tool moves with the robot, I will directly select the robot in the 3D world, and then use the mini toolbar to activate the interact command. And when I interact with the robot's joints, the tool should move with it, and it does. Great. So let's reset the simulation to return the robot to its initial joint configuration. And now we want to add the process component that needs to create the pallet so the robot knows where it needs to place those car tires. So I'll go to the eCatalog panel, and I will collapse Tools. I'll go back to the Works library, and we need to create a pallet, so I'm going to add another Works process component. So let me find it real quick. There it is. Let's drag that into the 3D world. And we want to create a pallet, so we need to add that component to the 3D world. So I'll go to the eCatalog panel, and under Models by Type, I'll click Products and Containers again. And let's search for a pallet, so I'll type in pallet. And we have a lot of hits. Let's use a Euro pallet, which you can see here. So I'll drag that into the 3D world. And its location doesn't matter, so I'll move it close to the car tire and the task controller over here. And we need that component's name, so I'll just copy it from the Component Properties panel. Select the Added Works Process component here. And for the task, we know we want to create one pallet, so I'll use a Create Task. And we're going to create a pallet, so I'll paste in that name of Euro space pallet. We don't need to give it a new product ID in this case, so I'm just going to create the task, run the simulation, and notice we now have that pallet created there. But it seems the pallet's a bit too big for the Works Process component, so we need to resize this process component. To do that, let's change its C length property to be 1500, its C width to be 1000, and that's actually 100, sorry. And that looks good, but it doesn't actually look, visually appeasing. So let's make this look more like a conveyor. I'll go to the Component Properties panel, click the Geometry tab. I'm not going to show the box, but I will show it as a conveyor. And that looks good, but it's probably not the best location for the robot, picking and placing car tires here. So let's actually drag the Works Process component to the side of the robot over here. And that looks good. I think the robot can reach everywhere there. So now if we want to verify that, let's select the robot in the 3D world. I'll then go to the Component Properties panel, click the Workspace tab, and select the Envelope checkbox here. So now I can see the area of reachability for the robot. And we can see, yep, everything in the pallet should be within reach, but I'm actually going to select the Works Process component and move it a bit closer to the robot. So that looks good. Let's now select the robot again and turn off that envelope. And now after the robot picks and places car tires onto the pallet, we want to ship the pallet down the conveyor line, so we need to add another conveyor over here. So I'm going to reset the simulation, select the conveyor in the 3D world, and on the mini toolbar I'm going to click the Clone command to generate another conveyor. I'll then use the PnP command to connect that conveyor to the Works Process component that's creating the pallet. And we need to resize that conveyor. So in the Component Properties panel, let's change its width to be 1000. That looks fine. And now we need to teach the robot using the Works Process components. So we need, when the car tire is at this location, we need to send out a task to the robot to pick it up and then place it over here on the Euro pallet. In this case, we're going to use feed and need task. So the process component here will feed a robot a car tire, and then another Works Process component will request a need for that component or need for those car tires. So let's select the Works Process component here that gets the car tire. And then in the Component Properties panel, I'll create a task called feed. And what product do we want to feed? What component? Well, it's called car tire. So you could type it here, or you could have the all checkbox selected there to feed everything. So actually, let's do that. I'll clear out the list of product ID. And the task name, to identify this feed task, let's make it called pick tire. And we need to define what tool the robot will use to pick up those car tires. So we want the robot to use the tool that's already attached to it. So I'm going to go to the cell graph panel, and get that name. So it's called Simple Gripper. So I'll type that under tool name, Simple Gripper. And we need to use a tool frame in this gripper. So we can't see it right now in the 3D world, so I'm going to go to the Program tab and use the jog command to select the robot. And let's go ahead and turn on the tool frames in the 3D world. So go to the 3D world toolbar and click the frame types arrow and then select this checkbox here called Robot Tools. So you can see here are the tool frames of the robot and this imported tool frame from the gripper. So it's called gripper tool _1, but we can go to the jog panel and click the tool drop down menu here, and you can see, yep, there's its name, gripper tool _1. So let's now go back to the Home tab and configure the layout. So I'll select this process component again, and we're still teaching that feed task. So we're using simple gripper, and we're going to use a tool frame called gripper tool _1. I'll then create the task, and now we need to create the need for that car tire so the robot knows where to place those tires that are fed to it. And we actually need to first assign that feed task to the robot, So I'll select the robot manager here for the robot. And in its task list, in the component properties panel, I need to reference that feed task name so it can assign it to the robot. And that was called pick tire. And now let's select this process component over here to create a need for those car tires. So in the component properties panel, I'll set task to be need. And what does it need? Well, the default product ID for the car tire is its name, so it's called car tire, spelled with a Y. So if I create that task, notice I did not need to assign it to the robot. The robot manager, through the task control, will automatically know that, hey, this process component needs a car tire or a component with that product ID. And the robot will know that it was assigned a feed task for feeding a component with a product ID of car tire to any other process component that needs it and is within reach. So if I now run this simulation, we should see the robot pick that car tire and place it on this process component. So yep, the robot motions to pick up the car tire, it picks it up, and wow, what happened? Let's stop the simulation and see what happened here. So the robot did what we wanted it to do, it's just that it placed the car tire in a location that's not suitable for the pallet. So we need to change the location of where the robot will place those car tires. And to do that, we're going to teach location in this process component for this type of component called car tire with that product ID. So with the simulation stopped, I can now select this one car tire here. And let's now go ahead and reposition it. So I'm going to use the move tool. And let's actually move the car tire up just a bit. And I'm going to use a shortcut for snapping the car tire to a location. So I'm going to hold down the shift key. And notice I can now pick a point on this component's geometry. So right there looks fine. I can now drag the component with that point to another location, and I can snap it to this edge point here on the top face of the pallet, so that looks fine. I'll let go, and I want to exit out of this shortcut command, so I'm going to press the escape key, and I'm back to using the move tool, and I'll just kind of eyeball it here of where I want the car tire to be placed initially. So right there looks about fine. And now to save this location for the car tire in this process component, I will select it here in the 3D world. I'll then go to the component properties panel. Notice we have a button here called teach location. So I can teach and store this location for the car tire for future use. And I have the only contain components checkbox selected here. So only the components that are in this works process component, their locations can be stored. So if I now click teach location, the pallet and the car tire are now inside of this process component. So notice it now stored a location for those components. So if I was to reset the simulation and run it again, we should see the robot place the car tire where we taught it to be in this process component. So let's see the robot. It comes into view and places the car tire. Great. Let's stop the simulation. And we were able to teach the robot to pick and place one car tire, but what if we wanted to teach to pick and place more than one car tire? Well, we simply have to change this need task to a need pattern, and then teach the works process component what pattern it needs to have. So to do that, let's get the dimensions of this car tire first, so we know what the step size in the X and Y axis are, and also the Z axis to have more than one layer of car tires on this pallet. So I'll go to the Tools group and use the Measure tool, and instead of edging the edges and faces, let's use the bound box of this car tire, so it's complete volume space. So in the Measure task pane under Snap Type, I'll select the Bound option here. I'll now select an upper corner point in the car tire's bound box. And notice I do not have to point directly at the corner point. I can just kind of hover near it and it will select it for me. And I'll do this bottom corner point here. And we can see we have an indication of the x, y, and z distances. So x and y are both at 518.5, and the z is at 162.4. And I'll exit out of the measure tool right now by pressing the escape key, but my measurement is still listed here in the output panel for future use. So now to teach the works process component that pattern, I'll go to the component properties panel. I'll set the task to need pattern, and instead of creating a new task, I'm going to replace an existing task. So insert new after line, I'll set it to be that need task I created, and then instead of clicking this button here called create task, I'll click replace task. So the product ID we need in this process component is called car tire, and the amount we need along the x-axis, let's see, we can probably fit 3 car tires, so let's use an x value of 3 and the amount of 2, so 2 rows of 3. And for the stack, let's actually use 3 layers, so 3 layers of tires. So I'll set the amount z to be 3, and the step size is going to be from our measurements, so that was 518.5. Let's round it up for step x, and that's the same for step y, so 518.5, and the z-axis was 162.4. And for our start range and end range, that looks fine because this is defined with our amounts here. So I'm going to click replace task, and we can see if we click this drop-down menu, it's first going to create a palette and then need a pattern of car tires. So if we now reset the simulation, we first actually need to teach the process component to transport out that Euro palette after it gets all those car tires. So I'm going to add one more task called transport out, and we're going to insert it after we get the pattern of car tires. So I'll set task to be transport out, and the list of product IDs, let's actually use all of them. And let's see what happens if we actually use this setup. So we pick and place the car tires, and then we transport everything out. Let's see how that works. So here come the car tires. And let's speed up the simulation just a bit. You can see the row it picks and places the first car tire. And where's it put the second tire? Yeah, it puts it over there. And it keeps on going, and it's doing that pattern. Great. So let's speed up the simulation just a bit. Now the robot goes to the second layer, and yep, that z-axis was good. So now the robot's stepping to the next layer. Great. So let's keep on speeding it up. Faster, faster. Let's now go to the third layer. There might be some unreachable points, but we can test to see if that happens. So there's that one tire. 2 more tires. Now everything should transport out. And whoa, what's going on? Alright, it seems that when we were transporting out the components in this works process, we didn't actually merge these car tires to the pallet. So if I select this car tire here, well actually let's select it here, and use the PMP command, we can see that this car tire is attached to the works process component, not the pallet. So the same with this guy over here, it's now attached to this conveyor. So we need to merge these car tires with the pallet, so when we move the pallet out of this process component, the car tires move with it. So to see how that works, let's reset the simulation. Select the works process component here that has the pallet. And before we transport out the car tires, we need to execute a merge task before that. So going to set the insert new after to be the second task, so after we create the pattern. And then the type of task we need to create is called merge. And we're going to merge the car tires, so I'll have them listed here for a list of product ID. And I'm going to merge them to that pallet. So its product ID is its name by default, so that's Euro space pallet. And we don't want to merge everything, so I'm going to clear this all checkbox. So just the car tires will be merged with the pallet. So I'm going to create the task, and then after they're merged, it's then going to transport out them. So let's run the simulation and see how everything works out. So it's doing a great job so far, but let's speed it up, make it go faster. And there's the first layer. And there's the second layer. And so far, so good. Actually, we'll stop the simulation once we get close. There's the last car tire. And let's actually change the simulation runtime to speed back to normal. So I'm going to double click the thumbnail here and set back to 1. So I'll run the simulation. Robot picks and places that last car tire. And yeah, the whole pallet of tires now moves down the conveyor line. Great. Alright, this concludes the video. If you have any more questions, please feel free to visit our forum at forum.visualcomponents.com, and I hope you have a wonderful day.